I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Ruth Wilson, star of Showtime's The Woman in the Wall. Ruth, you play Lorna, a troubled woman who is understandably consumed by grief and anger. And I was really taken with how lived in your performance came across. She's messy, her circumstances are uncomfortable. So looking back during production, what was a typical day like on set for you while shooting scenes that required you to really go for it?
What was it typically like? Well, there were long days. I mean, we're, shooting these days on TV, as everyone is, it's very fast. The show was kind of constantly organically moving, so scripts were always being worked on. It was very collaborative. So we were sort of, even in downtime, lunchtime, prior to going on, we were constantly working scenes, and maybe not just for that day, but for days, for scenes that are going to come in a few days later, next week or whatever else. So there was a constant work at the script and the material. I mean, this is very sensitive material. It's also very unusual material. It uses lots of different genres to kind of tell this story. So actually it was quite unique as a piece of drama, and actually had lots of challenges as a result, and performance challenges and everything else. So it was a constant thing that we were working at weekends. It was full on. So it wasn't just an emotional demand, there was a sort of practical demand to be kind of getting inside the material. So I think probably that lived in was that it was lived in. There wasn't much downtime, and there wasn't much sort of time outside. It felt quite a full-on experience generally. Um, so that's probably what the lived in felt like. It was kind of, we were all in it all the time.
Wow. You know, given that they gave you a producer credit, which meant that you were able to have a bit more input into the character, into the direction of the story. I love it how this show leans into those horror elements. I wasn't expecting that. It could have been what we've seen before. This is something that I haven't really seen, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. Was that something that you enjoyed, getting your teeth stuck in from behind the scenes as well, so that you were able to fully realize this character and the story?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that appealed to me when I first read the script, and there's one pilot when we first read it, and it was really surprising to me. I thought, wow, it's kind of obviously it's like a story that needs to get out there, an important story that needs to be told. But it was what was surprising about it was the way it's being told. And I thought Joe was starting to land on something really interesting about, the horrifying nature of this reality, how you can put that through a horror lens, but the horror lens is psychological horror. So it was like, right, okay, it makes sense to put this as a crime caper and almost gothic horror story, because it was horrifying, and it's the crime at the center of it, in reality. So I thought that's really smart. And I think if we can do that successfully, we can try and get it out to a wider audience. It isn't just a documentary or just a straightforward drama. We are putting it through genre tropes, which helps an audience feel kind of at ease sometimes, or familiar with some of the material. But then, okay, we will suddenly turn it on its head and make them feel very disconcerted. And so I love that. I love the challenge of that. It did mean it was hard as a performer and also producer and in the writing, because you're constantly struggling with something that feels very, well, it hasn't been trod before, this style. So it's not, we're like turning things on its head, and we're kind of pushing the boundaries, and we're taking risks. So that did feel quite challenging. And as an actor, you're going, okay, I need to kind of create a character that can exist in very naturalistic scenes and social kind of realism almost with those women. But then I also need to be able to serve the horror elements of it, and also the kind of black comedy elements of it too. So, you're going, wow, I've got to kind of traverse all these different genres and find something that feels believable, within all those genres. So that was a real challenge, but one that was fun, and really satisfying.
Given that the series exposes the sordid, shameful atrocities committed by the church, were you and show creator Joe Mota and the creative team ever concerned or nervous about taking such a gamble, going out on a limb in terms of the way that this show is presented? in such an unusual and different way. I mean, when you have that risk, inherent risk, does that make things more interesting or more exciting, or is it just a really terrifying aspect?
It's terrifying because and it makes the stakes much higher. So you are feeling ultra responsible, not only just, usually you're feeling responsible for the story that you're telling, but, these are real people's experiences. I mean, this is fictional, but it
Yeah.
has been drawn from real experiences. So you don't want to minimize that. You don't want to undermine that. You really want to make sure that those stories are getting out there and you're not feeling like it's exploiting their story. You want people to go and deep dive. You want to educate people as well as entertain them. So putting entertainment next to something quite traumatic is a worrying. Definitely, you feel responsible and you want to get it right. I mean, I think we all felt that, to be honest, and that's why, again, the lived-in feeling of like working on it all the time was to try and make sure that we were always serving those women and those survivor stories. um, and testament to that was like once it went out, and certainly in the UK,
Yeah.
every paper did a massive deep dive on these institutions and put them in the spotlight to sort of challenge them. And I was thrilled. That's all we wanted, was to get that story out there. So the risk was worth it, but it did feel challenging at times and worrying and scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. And when you make something like this, it's a labor of love. It would be so horrible for it to just go out into the ether and then be ignored. Or, yeah, that's great. And then we move on to the next, reality TV show on
Yeah.
at 9 p.m. This didn't do that. It was really quite impactful, particularly in the UK. And now that it's streaming and airing on Showtime in the US. I must admit, though, I came into this with a lot of my own confirmation bias about the
Mhm.
church and the institutions and some of their shameful legacy. I just wonder if your experience in the series impacted your own views about those institutions.
Well, I grew up a Catholic. I was born and raised a
Right.
Catholic. I don't go to church anymore. My dad still goes. So I mean, what is interesting, I think a lot of the work I've done, actually, I've done 3 projects where the Catholic Church is central, whether it's His Dark Materials or Mrs. Wilson, which was
Mhm.
about my grandmother who ended up finding God and having a religious experience in her 40s. All of it is a kind of study of the impact of faith in the Catholic Church. So to me, it is a fascination. It's something that I grew up with, and it's something I'm constantly kind of tussling with or exploring in my work. So it, it hasn't, I kind of see the benefits of religion or benefits of faith, the benefits of community in that way, and actually the essential good elements of what it's teaching. But humans at the end of the day tend to exploit and manipulate and corrupt many of the things that are good. But um so I think the church has a lot to answer for. It still has to reconcile what it's done, and it has improved. I mean, Ireland itself has progressed so far from the
Mhm.
point at which this happened, which was only 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and they've really progressed. So in a way, it is changing a lot in people's attitude to that power of an institution, and how they can challenge it and improve it. But yeah, I think part of the work I do is always studying that, to be honest.
Yeah. Um, I love how the series opens and closes with a whisper of Claire
Mhm.
Harner's poem Immortality. I wasn't really familiar with the poem, but I did look it up and read about it, and thought it's a perfect way for Joe to bring that into this story. What are your thoughts on how this effectively bookends Lorna's journey in the series?
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem, and I hadn't heard of it actually. It's stunning, and actually, I'm getting goosebumps because
Yeah.
my brother watched the show, and my brother fought in Afghanistan um, in 2009. And he texted me when the show finished, and he said, "I carried that poem in my pocket
Wow.
as a soldier in Afghanistan." And oh, it makes me cry thinking of it. But so I didn't realize his connection to that poem either. But I'm sure lots of people have personal connections to it. It's a beautiful poem, and it's the idea that I'm still here. You can relate that poem both to Lorna, but also to her child, and the connection of mother to child, and even and loss generally, and grief, that you haven't died, you are there and you're present. You know, that there'll always be part of that person who's gone inside you and imprinted on your heart or on your soul. So I think it's a beautiful poem, you know, about loss and grief.
Yeah, and it's just such a great idea to bring that into the script. Yeah, it was just a perfect opening. I did not expect to hear it again towards the end, and when I did, I thought, okay, I'm really, really enjoying the way that this whole thing has come together.
Yeah.
Um, so when Lorna wakes into her sleepwalk, wielding an axe, she sets a car alight, and then you grin with this terrifyingly unhinged glee. And I was just all in. I'm like, yes, thank you. I want more of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean this in the most positive way possible, but I really enjoy unbridled, uninhibited, slightly bonkers Ruth Wilson performances. I always think
There's a few of
they're the
those out
best. There's a
there.
few. There are a few. You're really damn good at them. It begs the question, do you enjoy playing characters like that?
Yeah, I think there's a part of me that just likes letting rip. And I think there's sort of anarchic, you know, anarchic quality to me, which comes out in some characters, and it's with humor and with glee, you know. And I think there is part of my job that allows me to do that in perfectly safe, you know, conditions, environment. You know, I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just having fun. So no, I love one of the things that appealed to me to this show, you know, with this show was that scene. I was like, wow, this is amazing what she does in her sleep, and the idea of her subconscious coming out in her sleep, and her, you know, her real thoughts and feelings and actions being expressed in her sleep, and her having no control over it, and her being scared of sleeping because of what she might do. I thought that's such a brilliant premise to set a character up. And she's only going to have less and less sleep and do more and more with things in her waking day, because, you know, and the idea that going from sleep to wake becomes a sort of very, you know, the line between sleep and awake becomes very fine in that way. She's not sleeping at all, so she becomes mad. And I sort of think that's such a brilliant premise to hold on, someone trying to hold on to their sanity. And everyone else is telling her she's mad anyway. So it's kind of, it's got so much great juice and material to play with. That actual scene, I was wondering, how am I going to play this? Because I've seen so many people do sleepwalking zombie scenes, right? Just
Yeah.
nothing. And I thought, how am I going to do this differently? And I started looking up sleepwalking videos because people record themselves sleepwalking. And there's this one brilliant one with this woman, she's hilarious. And she's stuffing stuff down her pants, and she's chucking things, and she's talking to lampshades, and she's talking to plants, and she's farting and burping. It's great. You can find her on YouTube.
Old.
And I was like, she's like a grown baby. She walks like a baby. And I was like, this is brilliant. So I can find a really interesting physical world in which Lorna walks, where she's sort of slightly out of control of her body. It's more like a sort of marionette. And it just is, it brings a different vibe and kind of lends itself to the genre of the piece and the humor. And then we can play with it. I can do that manic smile, and it becomes a bit Clockwork Orange alongside something else. It lends itself to the genre. So I really love playing that scene, but I didn't know I was going to play it like that until the night before, and I did a bit of extra research and thought, actually, that's what we do.
Wow. When you say zombie, I just immediately think of like when growing up, if the idea of sleepwalking was your arms out, your eyes are closed, and
Yeah,
you're just kind of a zombie. And
yeah,
this is not that. And you are right. There is some really funny moments in this, which I was not expecting. And it was a nice little kind of reset so that we can then get back into, you know, the horrors of what we're watching. And the fourth episode of the series, The Cruelty of Man, is directed by Suri,
yeah,
and by Joe. It's a really, really impactful episode. It's where Lorna really ramps up her anguish, her bitterness, and her need for vengeance. And I then thought, is it difficult to portray that kind of trauma response without veering into melodrama or histrionics? Because there's a risk of that, isn't there?
yeah. Always there's a risk of going too far and being too big or dramatic, and you have to always tally with that. So it's like, I mean, you know, one of the best ways of dealing with that is just to do different versions of the takes. on the day. It's like, okay, let's do one where it goes big, and let's do one where we pull it back, and we do it all very smaller. I mean, by that point, the show had gone completely skewy. She'd sort of knocked down the wall, and no one, the body's not there. So her sense of reality has gone completely out the window. So I thought, there's got to be a sense where she suddenly goes, fuck it. There's no one, there's nothing to lose. Maybe
Uh,
I am mad. I've got no idea what's going on. But certainly, so she goes on a mad rampage in a way of like, well, so we played with that, and, pushing she suddenly gets more agency from that point on in the show, and starts owning her truth and seeking the truth. But yeah, always there's a balance you have to try and work out about, making it real, keeping it sort of not so intense that people switch off all the time, like keep bringing the lightness in, having the quirk, finding her strength alongside her vulnerability, kind of balancing it so it's not overwhelming in too many ways. And not just for the audience, but it's to kind of keep that story being told over 6 episodes, how we can do that.
yeah. And my final question is kind of related to that, because when when the wall is opened again and Aoife is not there, I'm like, I just didn't even know what to think. And I just kept thinking, we are kept guessing constantly throughout the series. And interestingly, so is the main character. And of course, Darren McCormick's character, and people are kept guessing. They're in the dark. That's an interesting dynamic because we're on the same page about what the hell is going on and we want to know. I wonder if that informed how you wanted to play, or how you wanted to approach playing, Lorna.
It's a really interesting question, because it was actually one of the challenges of doing the piece that there were two things for Lorna always that were at play. One was, has she just killed someone and put them in the wall?
Yeah.
And so the woman in the wall is one. And the other one is, my child might be alive or dead, right? So she's on these two very different kind of journeys the whole time. And for me to play them both at the same time was really hard, because you're sort of, they're two opposing things. So I just had to be like, right, look, I'm just going to play whatever's happening in the moment. I mean, that's what you should do anyway as an actor, but really just focus on what's going on in this moment now. And that's all that's happening. And the next scene might be that it's focused on her kid, but this scene is about the woman in the wall. So again, like you said, it's like just, she's constantly confused by what her real reality is. So all she can do is live in totally the present, because nothing makes sense and everything's denied and gaslit. So it became a process of doing that, to be honest. I had to just let go of trying to understand it, just be like, whatever's happening in that moment is, yeah, she has to just kind of focus on what's right in front of her.
I
Uh,
think we do the same
yeah.
as the audience. Yeah.
And if we
And because,
convinced you enough of that, then you'll go with us. Uh,
yeah,
and it jumps from, my story into Daryl's, into Simon's, into back into the women. And you're going from a very social realist scene into then some kind of horror scene and into the red room, like, wow, this stuff
yeah,
is,
a red room. I'm like,
yeah,
what the hell is this red room? But I mean, like, if it's not compelling and not well written and beautifully acted, we're out. We're just like,
yeah.
okay, this is too much effort. That certainly wasn't the case. I loved this, and you were amazing in it. Thank you so much for your time today, Ruth. I really appreciate the
Thanks
talk.
so much, Dave. Thank you so much. Bye.